You are listening to Demystifying Organizations. In partnership with McGraw-Hill Education, I'm your host, Jeff Shatton. My guest today is Michele Zanini. He's the co-founder of the Management Lab. Zanini helps forward-thinking organizations become more resilient, innovative, and engaging places to work. Zanini was previously an associate partner at McKinsey. Zanini's work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, the Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal. He holds degrees from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government and the RAND Graduate School. He lives in Boston, Massachusetts. I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Michele. Michele, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Jeff. It's a pleasure.
I really enjoyed your book, The Case for Humanocracy, that is now will be released in August. So people will be able to, I assume that they can get an advance copy on Amazon, a pre-order on Amazon. So if we can just walk through some of the main themes, you make an incredible case against bureaucracy, pro what you call humanocracy. Can you lay just the overview of why your skepticism of bureaucracies and why we should move more towards a humanocracy, as you call it?
Sure. So and maybe I can start by defining what we mean by humanocracy, because that is a term that isn't often used. So our idea of humanocracy is an organization that has been designed to maximize contribution rather than compliance. And compliance is instead the goal of bureaucracy, right? And it's built on the premise that the human capabilities that are going to be most valuable in the age we live in are precisely the ones that you can't command. Initiative, imagination, daring, energy, passion, right? And building an organization where people have the freedom and they have the incentives to exercise these gifts means uninstalling bureaucracy and creating something that is more human-centered in its place, right? And so in a bureaucracy, human beings are the instruments, right? And they're assets, human capital, right? And they're hired to produce products and services. And in a humanocracy, it's the other way around. It's the organization that is the instrument, right? It's the vehicle human beings use to multiply their individual impact. And it's for most people, I think this is a big mind flip, but we think that it's the only way to cure some of the ailments that plague our economies, our organizations, and the only way to really capture the large reservoir of human capacity that is largely untapped in a more traditional organizational form, which for most large organizations is the standard operating model.
So, stepping into the bureaucracy, what are the limitations of bureaucracy? We're all very familiar with how bureaucracies work. Why do those fail to meet the times that we live in for most companies?
Yeah, and I would say the most people, when they hear bureaucracy, they might think of the DMV or a department in Washington and so on. But the fact of the matter is that the bureaucratic kind of template where, strategy gets set at the top, big leaders appoint little leaders, rules are quite specific and are followed to the letter anywhere across the company, where job descriptions are very tightly specified, where resources are allocated kind of top down and they just trickle to the edges of the organization. That model is still the universal model that describes the operation of most medium to large size organizations. So you may call it something else, but it's very much what we see happening and describing most organizations today. And so we think that model when it was introduced and became mainstream in the late 19th century, early 20th century, it was a huge advancement, right? It allows companies to churn out efficiently products and services at scale. They create reliability, they create control, they create precision, they allow you to access and enjoy products that don't cost them a lot of money, right? And so there's a lot that bureaucracy has generated that is very valuable, right? And our contention is that that comes at a cost, right? There is a tax that bureaucracy puts on human effort, which undermines resilience, innovation, and engagement. And when I can kind of break that down for you, Jeff, but the premise of the book is that you don't have to choose to pay that tax anymore. That you can get precision, you can get reliability, efficiency, and control with in other ways with another management model.
So if we were to kind of peel back the layers of the argument for bureaucracy, would effectively be that if you have a company or an organization of size, let's say 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees, the most efficient way for them to move forward, this would be the traditional thinking, is that you have somebody on top who is working with a handful of executives, and that they're going to set a strategic course and then allow everything to flow from that. And that if you go with any kind of a bottom-up process, you end up with chaos and anarchy. And that I think the traditional ideas behind a bureaucracy is that things are organized. Maybe you're missing out on new ideas. There's going to be, and I'm sure we'll get into this, some of the limitations. But at a minimum, and like you discussed, going from the 19th century, where before we had organization, modern organizations, you just had loose conglomerates of people. And as we were doing things into the Industrial Revolution with thousands of people, the way to congregate and to move forward was going to be with somebody up top effectively setting direction and setting processes and rules and all the things that flow from that. So walking through this, what is missed with with that form?
Yeah.
Why not have somebody on top dictating policies and procedures on the way down for a group of 5,000 people?
Right. So, and bureaucracy is a product of its time. When it emerged, workers were largely uneducated, mm-hmm. and they were literally, making things up as they went. There was no process for improving techniques and for planning and so on. So I can understand that at the time, it made a huge difference. And as I said, it created a ton of efficiency at scale, which, we're all grateful for. But, we live in a completely different environment where information is much less expensive to kind of disseminate. So you don't have to concentrate all the knowledge and all the thinking at the top of the organization, and then have that be propagated through standard rules. There's people more educated, the technology allows them to make better decisions. And we just learn more about how do you organize human effort at scale in different ways, which we can get into. We spent the core of the book on detailing, new management principles and explaining how companies.
Let's jump in. Let's jump in. Let's do it. What are the ways?
But let me just answer your question. Yeah. So the problem with bureaucracies is that they're inertial, they're incremental, and they're dispiriting. So they're inertial because if you give the power to initiate change in a few senior leaders, right, and those are the only people that are willing, able to change the course. When those people at the top fall prey to the very likely conditions of denial, of arrogance, and nostalgia, the organization falters, right? And that's why deep change in a bureaucracy is usually belated and convulsive. I mean, one example, Microsoft, now is doing much better, but there was a lot of talk 5 or more years ago about the lost decade of Microsoft, where they were late to every single shift in the industry. They were late to, mobile devices. They were late to to the cloud. They were late to, a variety, music and so on. And a lot of that could be, uh, you know, uh, be attributed to, the Windows-centric paradigm that's Ballmer and Gates had, like where if something was not related to Windows, it was not an important opportunity. There are a lot of people at Microsoft who saw these opportunities and proposed new alternatives, and in fact, came up with prototypes faster than maybe the competitors that eventually ran with the opportunity did, but they were always stymied, right? So
ironically, their lost decade was lost out to Apple, which was just run by a dictator.
Yeah, which is maybe the exception that proves the rule, because if your organization, if your ability to be resilient and adaptable depends on having Steve Jobs,
yeah,
there aren't many Steve Jobs, right, in the world. It's basically like Jim Collins has said, he has these like level 1, 2, 3, 4, and level 5 leaders, and the level 5 leaders are like these like Steve Jobs types, and he in his analysis he says, it's like a vanishingly small proportion of leaders out there. So like, fine. So maybe if you have someone who's like Lee Kuan Yew, with the administrative skills of Lee Kuan Yew, and the moral leadership of Desmond Tutu, and and the creativity of Steve Jobs, then maybe you can run a centralized organization very well. But chances are that they're not, which means most organizations are not going to live up to that promise. And so, like, you'd rather have an organization that is able to function well with mediocre leaders, as opposed to one that excels when you have a genius, right? So, anyway, so they're inertial, right? They're incremental, right? Because they're innovation phobic. Because of their focus on reliability, precision, and quantification. They're risk averse. So, they offer very few incentives to those who are inclined to challenge the status quo. Being a maverick in a bureaucracy is a high risk occupation, right? Take a risk and you fail, you're out. And, worst of all, in our opinion, bureaucracies are dispiriting. They're soul crushing. You don't really have much influence in an organization unless you're like a senior person. And so you kind of disconnect emotionally from work. So like initiative, creativity, and daring, which are in a way what you need, right, to succeed in the creative economy, they just get left out at home. And so that's the problem. And as I mentioned before, bureaucracy isn't the only way to organize, right? So in the book, we talk about a small but growing band of post-bureaucratic pioneers who are proving that it's possible to capture the benefits of bureaucracy, which are undeniable: control, consistency, coordination, while avoiding the penalties, right? So the inflexibility, the mediocrity, the apathy. And when you look at these companies compared to their conventionally managed peers, and these are companies that include Nucor, which is the world, America's largest steel maker, Svenska Handelsbanken, which is the leading European bank, W. L. Gore, the maker of fabrics and thousands of other products.
Maybe let's go through one of those. Go through the Nucor example.
Yeah. So Nucor is an interesting company, right? And we are certainly not the first ones to highlight the fact that they are managed in a very different way. But what's struck us is that they have been able to operate with this philosophy that really puts frontline employees at the center of everything they do. They've been able to to operate with that philosophy over several decades as they've grown in size, right? Which is very unusual. A lot of the companies that people point to that are kind of interesting deviants are often quite small, and so the accusation is always, well, Zappos could operate as a holacracy, but it's 1,500 people. Try doing that like in hardcore, and they're like an online business. Try doing something like that in a company that makes things with tens of thousands of people. And Nucor is very much a company like that. They are the largest steelmaker in the United States. They have about 26,000 employees. They call them teammates. $25 billion in sales. They make all sorts of like steel products. And they've been the runaway success in the industry. They I think since 1969, they've only lost money in 1 year, and that was 2008 in the financial crisis. They've never laid any employee off. And if you look at their statistics around revenue per employee, profit per employee, return on capital, they are just outperforming pretty much anybody else in the industry. And when you talk to the folks at Nucor, what they would say is that the engine of success, what really creates this advantage for them, is not so much their business model and not so much their particular technology, but rather the fact that they've organized themselves so that they leverage consistently the everyday genius that sits across 26,000 people.
And how do they pull in the opinions of 26,000?
So what they do is several things. So first thing they do is they are organized into small entrepreneurial units. So they have plants around the U.S. and other parts of the world. Each plant has its own standalone business with its own P&L. So you imagine a sheet mill or a bar mill. They have their own P&L. They have zero corporate allocations. In fact, in Nucor, they have 100 people at headquarters. Out of it's a $25 billion company, and you have to. I went there, and they're like, all these headquarters are palatial. They sit in the middle of the city, and so on. There's, it's like it's nondescript building in the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. You have to really try hard to get there and find it because they're next to Coca-Cola's regional operations, and so no one would even know. But so they have very small center with very few people, and then these very entrepreneurial business units. They have about 90 of them who are in charge of their own future. And within those units, you then have teams. So you have teams that work on the melt shop. That the people that take the scrap metal that they convert into steel and go through that process. They have people that are in charge of shipping. They have people that are in charge of maintenance and so on. And so these units are all fairly autonomous, and they get paid based on their productivity. So, and this is one important part, of what they do. So they are focusing everybody on maximizing asset productivity. So take a typical team in the melt shop, let's say. So they have a certain, their equipment is rated for a particular set capacity. So 100 pieces of steel a day, let's say, right? So that's what they're expected to produce. At 80% of that capacity, they whatever they produce on top of that starts to generate profit sharing for them. So they get to benefit from any production above that threshold, and there's no limit. So if they get it up to 120, 130 of rated capacity, they get to generate and a lot of productivity advantages, and they get to reap in the fruits of that. So they have this incentive to sweat the assets as much as possible and to innovate on production techniques as much as they possibly can. So while their base salary is 70% of the industry average, they actually make a quarter to a third more than the industry average because of that productivity advantage that they generate.
But what's interesting is that, we see some of that within traditional bureaucracies, right?
Well, typically, compensation based on productivity that you or your team generates is
profit sharings, or if you think of the consulting model, how they evaluate consultants on the division performance and the company performance and individual performance.
But if you look at profit sharing, there are two things. It's actually it's applicable if you look at the statistics from places like the American Workplace Conditions Survey and other places. Profit sharing is in place in not every company, especially and even if it is, often it's not accessible to every employee, and even if it is, it doesn't really make a big financial difference to their salary. And even if it does, it's often based on the productivity of the entire company or the profitability of the entire company as opposed to their own. So what's very different from Nucor, and Nucor, by the way, has profit sharing, which is generated based on overall profitability. But most of the compensation that a Nucor teammate receives, and whatever is above base, is directly related to the productivity improvements that person and that person's team generates.
Do they allow for job crafting? So the lower level employees, are they able to help craft their own responsibilities?
There are basically no fixed job descriptions at Nucor. Okay. It's I mean, obviously, if you're part of the melt shop, you're not going to go into shipping, right? But you are negotiating your particular responsibilities with your team. It's about 20, 30 people across different shifts within the team. There is a supervisor. The supervisor, in a way, is more of a coach. They get appointed only if the team is really willing to follow that person. And if the person is incompetent, that person gets, fired by the team. And there is amazing amount of energy placed at Nucor in cross training. And you, for instance, could go in on a day off and train in a different department or a different machine. You get paid for that. You get trained in business acumen skills because the idea is that to act like a business owner, you need to not only have the information that allow you to make the right decision, but you need to have the skills. And so they have this amazing business simulation called Dollars and Tons that everybody takes at least once a year. Well, actually, I'm not so sure if it's everybody takes it once a year, but at least you do it pretty regularly, where you're in charge with a team of 7 people of a mill, and you have other teammates working on other mills, and you compete with each other. And it's a day-long simulation where you have to make decisions around capital investment, hiring, firing, bidding on contracts, and the like. And so everybody knows what working capital is. Everybody knows what the return on assets on that plant is. In fact, if you go to the cafeteria, you'll see real-time statistics on the profitability of that plant, and everybody knows exactly what those mean. And so they've put a tremendous amount of effort in creating well-rounded, highly skilled individuals. But the interesting thing is that they're selective in hiring, but they're not selecting for those kinds of skills. They're selecting for being able to for attitudinal things like, are you a good collaborator? Are you a self-starter? And so on. So the idea is that you come to Nucor, you stay there for a long time, and they will give you the capabilities to think and act like an owner. And then you also have a ridiculous degree of autonomy within the team. You can decide to make orders in the thousands, tens of thousands of dollars without asking for sign off. I mean, there's one person that I met who is the supervisor managing the electric arc furnace, that literally, they put these giant electrodes into this heap of scrap metal and liquefy it. So that person, that team, is in charge of negotiating pricing for electricity from the local power plants, which are a key cost to their operation. And they do it themselves. They're not like, there isn't someone like there isn't a purchasing department that sets the rate and whatever.
I'm very surprised to hear that. I was in purchasing for an airline, and I'm very surprised to hear that they don't farm that out. It sounds like one of the great innovations there, though, is the idea that you would be responsible for your own job description and job responsibilities, along with the team to craft that. You would think that the downside to that is it's gonna take a lot of time. It's gonna be it could be a little bit messy. The upside, though, is that people are going to feel like they are part of the process. and that they have a lot of autonomy over what they're doing with their time. How does the cost interact with the benefits of that? Some of the obviously it's again, bureaucracies are very efficient. It's the most efficient thing ever would be you have a boss who says, all right, here's the 30 of you. These are your 30 responsibilities. Any questions? No questions. Thank you very much. Right. So it's very quick. It's very efficient. The downside, as we're getting to, is that people don't feel that they don't feel like they don't have any say so. They're not committed. They have issues with they never go above and beyond on their own responsibilities. How do you think through some of the costs and benefits of efficiency versus what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, well, two things. First, I think it's a bit of a false trade-off, because a lot of the companies that we looked at are beacons of efficiency in their industry when you look at the cost relative to revenue. And the reason for that is that a lot of the efficiency is being pursued by everyone in the company because they have the incentives to be efficient, they have the skills to be efficient, they have and they have the capability to be efficient. So Nucor, we talked about, if you're paid on like your productivity, you're gonna make sure that the least productive things that you have to do are gone. In fact, the paradox of Nucor is that they're probably the most eager consumers of automation technology in the steel industry. And that's because, as I said, they don't want to do things that a machine can do better. And then, interesting thing there is that they don't lose their jobs, right? Because, they will work on other things that will make it more productive. Another company that is like that is Svenska Handelsbanken. They're a Swedish based, but now they're multinational bank. And their cost to income ratio, so the relationship between like revenues and costs, is the lowest in the industry. And it's been like that for 30, 40 years. And the reason for that is because the branches themselves, a little bit like these Nucor plants, make all kinds of decisions around which credits to extend to whom, at what price, with what kind of interest.
Maybe I'm leading in the wrong direction. When you have 30 people, this is what I kind of want to get at. When you have 30 people that are joint trying to make a decision, whether that's to fire somebody on the team, whether that's to divvy up responsibilities, it's got to be inherently less efficient than one person dictating it. So I just want to dig down into the costs and benefits of creating teams that have these joint decisions versus it coming from a top-down process.
And again, so fair enough. So you don't want to talk about the overall efficiency of the business, but I would still say that if you have a team of people whose money depends on having a leader who is competent, there will be zero tolerance for having an incompetent leader. And so the idea that somehow having one person making decisions for other people and telling them what to do is always more efficient. It may be if you have a competent leader, but often leaders are not that competent, and so I'm not sure that you get much more efficiency that way. But even if you assume that you have someone who's really competent and they can just kind of make decisions faster than a collective, I would say that you got to distinguish between time to decision and time to impact. Right. So a centralized system might get you a decision faster, but then you got to think about all the time that person needs to spend convincing everybody else that is the right decision.
It's like I think of right. I mean, China's more efficient. We're a mess. Like the U.S. is a mess. We're a messy process. We're democracy. It's ruckus. It's back and forth. Not that there's not back and forth in China, but it just doesn't look the same in terms of efficiency. When I was, I know we're getting a little tangential, but it's interesting. When I was in Beijing before the World Expo, and I was walking around there in the middle of Beijing. There's like 1 square mile that's just been completely changed over for the World Expo. And I was asking, how did they do that? And they said, well, what do you mean? How did they do that? They just said, you live here, you don't live here anymore. And they just, took all these people and moved them out from that area. They said, okay, these are no longer your homes. It's very efficient. And I think within teams, right, and within organizations, we are very, and I happen to be on your side of the equation, but there's a trade-off, right? We're actually really used to having things in most, especially for-profit companies, where there are decision makers who do, like, the kind of the buck stops here. What you're suggesting is what feels to me to be like a messier process, but one that I think is ultimately better because you end up with more buy-in. Is that fair?
When you change, you get more buy-in, and you actually may get better. You probably get better decisions because you're consulting, you're leveraging more people, and you're getting to impact faster because you don't have to convince everyone about that particular choice that someone made. I mean, Red Hat is an interesting case. Jim Whitehurst, who's now the president of IBM because Red Hat has acquired IBM, he came from like you from the airlines. He came from, I think, Delta, and he became CEO of Red Hat.
Was a very, very short time in airlines, but yeah.
Yeah, but he basically had this top-down model of change, and then he realized that wouldn't work at Red Hat. He was quite skeptical at first because Red Hat, comes from the open source system, community, and so there's this aversion to hierarchy and preference towards meritocracy. Depends on you get a voice of your share of voice depends on your competence, not your title. Anyway, so he was like appalled at sort of how laborious some decision making was initially, but then he quickly realized how decisions were better, and there in the end implementation was faster and execution was smoother because everybody was involved and no one had to be communicated to or trained and explained. I mean, the whole notion of when you look at change processes and how the failure rate of change, organizational change, like 5% if you believe the consultants like McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and the others. And the biggest reason for that is because people resist change. But to me, it's not that people are resistant to change in general. They're resisting change being done to them, right? And so you eliminate all that crap if you involve them in the change process. So I think that might answer your question. I would also say maybe, Jeff, just to add on that, because you mentioned China. One of the examples we have in the book is Haier. They're the largest appliance maker in the world. They are based in China. We've been there several times. The CEO is, completely averse to kind of this notion of central planning, and the fact that somehow, the best decisions are made at the top, and they're like some experts are just gonna promulgate them, and everybody needs. And this whole idea is like, there is power in emergence. And like, I don't know, like he would say, I don't know where the best idea is going to come from, what the best process is for solving this particular problem, who is the best person. I'm going to create a system where that kind of emerges naturally and efficiently because we have an infrastructure for that to happen. So, I don't think, again, you have to choose between order and efficiency on the one hand and kind of chaos and kind of convoluted decision making on the other. A lot of the companies that we feature, which gives us great hope, are able to do both.
Yeah. I think you should. I think there's no reason why we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. How has your thinking changed, or has it changed at all in the COVID era? Given you wrote your book, I assume all before coronavirus. So has this shifted your thinking?
Well, I would say a couple of things there. COVID and once in a generation kinds of catastrophes like it are, kind of stern tests of resiliency. But in a way, they're just the outlier case on a spectrum. Like in our book, we talk about all sorts of like upheaval that is happening in the world. And, we describe how a lot of companies are faltering. And I think we would argue that COVID is no different. It's a lot of companies haven't really passed, or a lot of large-scale organizations, public, private, and the like, have just not adapted, not in a way that is satisfactory. And you might say it's a little unfair to judge them on this particular instance, but we think it's just telling, right? That we just our institutions in general just haven't been able to respond as well. So that will be.
Is there any example of an organization that you think has responded in a way that you've been impressed by?
Well, so going back to our set of examples in the book, not to be overly focused on them, but we've kept in touch with executives at various companies. We talk about, Southwest Airlines, Nucor, Hire, and the like. And I think they're all faring better than the competition precisely because they've been able to mobilize people. Well, people have mobilized. No one has been mobilizing people. At South, let me just give you an example of Nucor. Again, they haven't fired anybody. They never do. They'd rather take a hit. They have this notion of share the pain, share the gain. And so everybody's salaries have gone down, their work weeks have gone down. But we were just talking to the recently retired CEOs about what people are doing, and he was saying, you would not believe the amount of innovation that is happening right now because people are more idle, they have more time. Mm-hmm. So they're experimenting with products, they're talking to customers, they're going to generate a whole set of services and opportunities that once the cycle comes back up, they'll be able to advance much more quickly than the competition, which is instead has laid off people. So when the cycle comes back, the others will have to hire people, they'll have to train people, they'll have to start from scratch. At Nucor, no one will have to be onboarded, they're all there, and they will be able to go to customers with new things. So those are the kinds of and Hire is the same way. We're talking to GE Appliances in Kentucky. They're owned by Hire. Their CEO was saying something quite similar, like everybody is working on new businesses that once the demand will come back, we'll be able to ship to. And so those are some of the examples I would mention. The other thing, Jeff, I would say around COVID is that it's just laid bare this notion of the fact that a lot of jobs in economies like the U.S. Are very, very good, right? That there's this enormous inequality that affects, the former CEO of Nucor, Ken Iverson, called it vertical inequality. That you have people who can do Zoom calls, they can work from home, they still get their salary, and a lot of people instead who are on the floor, in the field, who don't have great benefits, who don't have a salary that is, hasn't grown as much as people who are in the executive positions have, who are suffering disproportionately, right? And I hope that COVID and the upheaval that has followed it will help us reset a little bit on that and really focus on good jobs, which to me, good jobs, there's a lot of talk about making jobs good by paying people more. And that's certainly part of the equation. But the point is, and again, Nucor pays better than the competition, but you got to start with almost a different conception of, the fact that there's inherent value in every job. And it's not like a job is inherently a commodity job filled by commodity people, but you can enlarge the scope, the creative scope of every job. And if you do that and you give people the skills to be effective in that job, you'll pay them more because they'll be more productive. And we need to have a bit of a reset around that, and hopefully that will come as a result of the crisis.
All right. On that note, I want to thank you so much for joining me and taking some time to discuss your work.
All right. It was a pleasure, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it.